The air in the store was thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten memories. Dust particles floated lazily in the sunlight that filtered through the grimy windows, casting a warm, golden hue over the cluttered shelves and antique furniture. My fingers trailed along the edge of a worn oak table as I wandered through the maze of relics, each piece whispering stories of the past. I had been struggling with my art for months. Every stroke of my brush felt forced, every canvas a battlefield where inspiration refused to show its face. My girlfriend Lena had suggested I take a break, clear my mind, but I just couldn't. There was this need to create that gnawed at me, and it was a constant reminder of my inadequacy. So here I was, wandering through Morty's vintage antiques and collectibles, at an all-time low, hoping to find something, anything, that sparked some kind of creative inspiration. As I moved through the cluttered aisles, I spotted what looked to be a tarnished antique medical instrument. What the hell was this used for? I muttered slowly to myself, turning it over in my hands. I started picturing the potential horrors this thing had seen. As I set it back down and turned to keep going, I walked straight into a stack of old books and knocked them over, causing a loud crash. "Sorry," I called out, glancing nervously toward the old man behind the counter. That must be Morty. He looked up with a grumpy expression, grunted, and turned up the volume on his radio before returning to his newspaper. The crackling oldies station filled the shop with a nostalgic hum. I picked up the books and kept going. Then I saw it. Tucked away in a dimly lit corner, partially obscured by a faded velvet curtain, was an antique mirror. Its ornate gilded frame was tarnished with age, but the craftsmanship was exquisite. I felt a strange pull, a connection that seemed to reach out and wrap around me like a comforting embrace. I approached the mirror, my heart pounding with inexplicable excitement. As I gazed into it, my reflection stared back. But there was something different. My eyes sparkled with a light I hadn't seen in years, and my lips curled into a genuine smile. I looked happy, radiant even. It was as if the mirror was showing me a version of myself I had forgotten existed. I knew I had to have it. The shopkeeper, a hunched old man with piercing blue eyes, watched me as I brought the mirror to the counter.
$50.
He barely glanced at it before naming a price that seemed almost too reasonable. I didn't question it. I handed over the cash and left the store, the mirror carefully cradled in my arms. Back in my apartment, I hung the mirror on the wall opposite my easel. It felt right, as if it belonged there. I called Lena to tell her about my day. As I described the mirror, I could hear the curiosity in her voice.
"What's so special about it?"
she asked. "I don't know, it felt like it was calling to me," I said excitedly. We talked for a while longer, mostly about mundane things, but there was an underlying excitement in my tone that I hadn't felt in a long time. We made plans for that night and hung up. I walked over to the mirror once more. My reflection looked back at me, glowing with that same radiant happiness I'd seen earlier in the antique store. Energized, I picked up my brush and began to paint. The colors flowed effortlessly, each stroke guided by an unseen hand. I lost myself in the creation, hours passing in a blur. By late afternoon, I had finished a piece that took my breath away. It depicted a vibrant meadow under a sky bursting with color, a stark contrast to the uninspired canvases that littered my studio. I took a picture of it and posted it on Instagram, my usual platform for sharing my work. Normally, my posts only ever garnered a handful of likes, mostly from friends and fellow struggling artists. I was eager to see how this post went, but I was already running late to meet up with Lena.
Oh, crap.
So I chucked some clothes in my overnight bag, grabbed a bottle of wine, and ran for the door. The next morning, I woke up early and checked my phone out of habit. My heart skipped a beat as I saw the notifications. The post had received over 100 likes and dozens of comments praising my talent. I could hardly believe it. This felt like the breakthrough I had been waiting for. My heart swelled with a mix of pride and disbelief. I couldn't help but smile as I scrolled through the comments, each one a testament to the passion and energy that had poured out of me the day before. I got dressed quickly and hurried back to my apartment, eager to see the mirror again, to bask in the reflection that had seemingly unlocked my potential. When I stepped inside, the room was bathed in the soft morning light. I stood before the mirror, taking in my radiant reflection, feeling an unfamiliar yet welcome sense of accomplishment. It felt like a dream, one I was determined to hold on to for as long as possible. Days turned into weeks, and my connection to the mirror only grew stronger. I was finishing a few paintings a week. I would post a picture on Insta straight after finishing each painting, and in the morning I would wake up and eagerly check my notifications, each one gaining more attention than the last. The likes and comments continued to pour in, and my follower count skyrocketed. It felt surreal, as if I had finally tapped into a wellspring of creativity. Each time I stood before the mirror, I saw a version of myself that I barely recognized. A version that was confident, radiant, and endlessly inspired. It became my ritual. I would spend a few moments each day staring into it, drawing strength from the reflection that smiled back at me. Then, I would sit down at my easel and let the magic flow. My paintings began to take on a life of their own. They were vibrant, full of emotion and depth. The subjects seemed to leap off the canvas, their stories coming to life in ways I had never managed before. I found myself repeatedly painting the same subject, a woman who resembled me, but seemed to embody a version of myself I couldn't fully grasp. My previous works paled in comparison. The change did not go unnoticed. Messages started flooding in from people who wanted to buy my paintings. I had never sold a single piece before, and suddenly I couldn't keep up with the demand. Lena was thrilled for me. She was my biggest supporter, always there with a kind word or a shoulder to lean on. But even she couldn't ignore the changes in my behaviour. I was painting more than ever, often losing track of time and forgetting to eat or sleep. My thoughts were consumed by the need to create, to capture the fleeting visions that danced in my mind. I started missing shifts at work, my day job becoming a distant obligation that was being overshadowed by my artistic obsession. One evening, as I was cleaning my brushes, my phone rang. It was Lena.
Hi, honey.
Her voice was filled with concern.
You missed your shift again today,
She said softly.
and you didn't answer my calls. Is everything okay?
I sighed, guilt gnawing at me. I'm sorry, Lena. I lose track of time when I'm painting. It's like the hours slip away.
I know this is important to you,
She replied.
but I'm worried. You need to take care of yourself. Promise me you'll get some rest tonight.
I promised her I would, but even as I said the words, I knew it was a lie. The pull of the mirror and the need to create were too strong. I could hear the worry in Lena's voice, but I pushed it aside, convincing myself that this was my moment and I couldn't afford to let it slip away. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a notification. I glanced at the screen and felt my heart skip a beat. It was a message from an art dealer downtown, someone who had stumbled across my Instagram profile and was interested in showing my work in their gallery. I could hardly believe it. This was the opportunity I had been dreaming of, the chance to finally prove myself. I immediately called Lena to share the news. She was ecstatic, her excitement mirroring my own.
I knew you could do it. You've been working so hard and it's finally paying off. We need to celebrate.
That night, we opened a bottle of champagne and toasted to my success. But even in that moment of joy, I felt a pull towards the mirror. I found myself glancing at it more often, feeling an insatiable urge to return to my easel. As the evening wore on, my excitement grew, and I became eager for Lena to fall asleep so I could start painting again. As soon as Lena's breathing steadied, I quietly slipped out of bed and returned to my studio. The room was dim, lit only by the streetlights filtering through the curtains. I began to paint, my movements almost feverish. Hours melted away as I lost myself in the creation. In the near darkness, something in the mirror caught my eye. I paused, squinting at the reflection, convinced I saw a flicker of movement, a shadow shifting, a subtle ripple across the glass. My heart pounded, confusion gripping me. I stared at the mirror, trying to discern what I had seen, but nothing seemed out of place. Suddenly, Lena's voice broke the silence.
Why are you up again? Come back to bed.
She pleaded, her tone tinged with exhaustion. I just need to finish this, I replied, returning my eyes to the canvas.
You're always saying that.
She sighed.
You need sleep. Please, just come back to bed.
I felt a pang of guilt but also irritation. I will soon, I promise. But as she turned and walked back to the bedroom, I knew I wouldn't be joining her anytime soon. As the days passed, my obsession with the mirror deepened. I noticed subtle changes in my reflection. At first, it was just a fleeting sense that something was off. My eyes seemed darker, my smile more forced. I brushed it off, attributing it to the stress of my newfound success. One afternoon, as the sun slanted low through the window, I sat hunched over my easel, utterly consumed by my painting. Each stroke of my brush felt like chasing a high, a desperate need to capture the vision in my mind. Exhausted, I glanced up at the mirror opposite me and froze. My reflection stared back. But something was wrong. The eyes that met mine were intense, almost predatory, devoid of warmth. A chill ran down my spine. My reflection didn't mirror my movements fluidly. Instead, there was a fraction of a second delay. It was almost like it was mimicking my movements, not reflecting them. I forced a smile, wanting to inject some warmth into my reflection. But what slowly spread across my reflection's face was more of a smirk. I knew I was smiling more than that. I widened my smile as far as I could. My cheeks started to ache. I sat there staring into the mirror with an enormous fake smile. But my reflection's smirk only lifted slightly. The blood drained from my face. I shut my eyes tight. I breathed deeply and waited a few moments. When I dared to look again, my reflection appeared normal. Did I imagine that? Am I that sleep deprived that I'm seeing things that aren't there? I sat there for what seemed like an eternity. I tried to shake off the eerie sensation, but the unease lingered. The incident left me unsettled. The next few paintings I completed were darker, more intense. They depicted scenes of turmoil and torment, emotions that seemed to bleed through the canvas. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, my followers loved them. The darker my work became, the more attention it received. Every like, every comment, every sale was a validation of my talent, a reassurance that I was on the right path. But the growing darkness in my art mirrored the unease that was beginning to fester in my heart. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting in the shadows of that antique mirror. Lena was worried about me. She noticed the bags under my eyes, the way I barely touched my food. She tried to talk to me, to get me to take a break, but I couldn't stop. I was on a roll, creating the best work of my life. Nothing else mattered. And so I painted. Day and night, I poured my soul into my art, driven by a force I couldn't understand. All the while, my reflection grew darker, the eyes staring back at me filled with a cold, malevolent gleam. The darkness that had begun to seep from the mirror found its way into my paintings more and more. What started as subtle shifts, a shadow here, a twisted expression there, gradually grew into a palpable sense of unease. Each stroke of my brush felt like a surrender to forces I couldn't comprehend, as if the mirror had become a conduit for my deepest fears and anxieties. Some of my followers were captivated by the newer, darker works. They praised the raw emotion, the intensity that seemed to leap from the canvas. Messages flooded my inbox, eager buyers pledging to support my upcoming show, drawn by the unsettling beauty of my latest creations. They spoke of seeing themselves in the torment depicted, of finding solace in the darkness that mirrored their own struggles. But others were not so supportive. Concerned whispers began to circulate among my circle of friends and fellow artists. They questioned the sanity behind the scenes, the abrupt shift from vibrant landscapes to macabre portraits of suffering. Lena, always my pillar of support, gently voiced her worries, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and apprehension.
"You're losing yourself in this,"
she said one evening, her voice soft but tinged with urgency.
"Your art, it's like it's consuming you."
I shrugged off her concerns. As the night of my art show approached, I found myself once again immersed in painting late at night, consumed by an eerie focus. Outside, the distant sounds of the street mingled with the gentle breeze fluttering my curtains. In a moment of distraction, I knocked over a glass of dirty paint water. As I bent to retrieve it, my gaze inadvertently shifted to the mirror, and what I saw filled me with a chilling dread. The blood drained from my face, every hair on my body standing on end. The glass slipped from my fingers, shattering on the floor. In the antique mirror, my reflection stared back at me, familiar yet horribly different. Its smile was grotesque, unnaturally wide and twisted. Its eyes bore into mine with an intensity that froze me in place. It was grinning, fixedly, not reflecting the horror etched on my own face. I know this sounds crazy, but despite the terror gripping me in that moment, a disturbing urge gnawed at my insides. To paint, to create, to satiate whatever hunger drove that malevolent reflection. I painted incessantly, day and night. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, and all the while my reflection continued to grin. It stared, unblinking, and grinned.
"You're scaring me."
Lena said softly over the phone.
"Please, just take a break. Come over tonight."
"I can't," I replied, my gaze involuntarily shifting to the mirror, where my reflection's unsettling grin seemed to mock me. "I have one more piece to finish before the show tomorrow."
"Babe, please."
Lena pleaded. "I have to go," I said abruptly, ending the call before she could protest further. It was stormy, the wind howling through the city streets. The rain battered against the windows of my apartment. A relentless drumming that matched the frantic beating of my heart. The power had gone out earlier. As darkness began to fall, I fumbled for matches and lit a few candles, scattering them around the room, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. I stood before the mirror, my eyes locked with my reflections. Its grin seemed wider tonight, more predatory, as if it knew something that I didn't. I picked up my brush, my movements mechanical. Each stroke felt urgent, driven by a force beyond my comprehension. The painting took shape, a tortured figure surrounded by darkness, haunted by unseen horrors. It was my most chilling work yet, a reflection of the turmoil within me. As I stepped back from the painting, my breath caught in my throat. The scene that had materialised on the canvas was not of my making. Two figures, one writhing in torment, the other a grotesque reflection of myself, grinning with an unnaturally wide and malevolent smile. It seemed to be pulling the tormented figure toward a hellish scene of distorted faces, each one contorted in silent anguish. It was as if my brush had tapped into a darkness beyond my control, painting a nightmare that now stared back at me with accusing eyes. Fear gripped me then, cold and unyielding. I stumbled back, knocking over a jar of brushes. They clattered to the floor, their clinks lost in the storm's fury. The wind howled against the windows, causing the panes to rattle violently. In the dim, flickering light, I turned to the mirror. A flash of lightning illuminates the room as I take in the horror of my reflection, its grin now impossibly wide and distorted. It starts to walk toward me. I stand paralysed while my reflection continues to get closer to the mirror's edge. Just as it seems on the verge of breaching the barrier between mirror and room, a sudden gust of wind bursts open the windows and throws me to the floor. The candles around the room flicker wildly, then go out, enveloping the room in complete darkness. The last picture that burned in my mind was the grinning reflection, with one hand clutching the outside of the mirror's frame as it pulled itself out.
What about that thing?
The young man asked, nodding toward the mirror.
Yeah, there's two.
The older man muttered, carefully removing the mirror from the wall.
They're selling everything. Deceased estate.
The younger mover, absorbed in his task of boxing up the last of the books, looked up with a furrowed brow.
Seriously? Do you know what happened?
My sister, she's a copper. She mentioned it a while back, said the woman who lived here went off the deep end, disappeared without a trace. I found scratch marks all over the floor.
He explained, gesturing toward the faint lines etched into the hardwood.
And a few fingernails too, like she was dragged somewhere. But no sign of a break-in, no evidence of anyone else being here, no footage of her leaving, just gone.
That's messed up.
The younger man muttered, his gaze flickering uneasily toward the antique mirror, now wrapped in protective padding.
They say your paintings are worth a mint now, though.
I bet.
The younger man replied. The older mover hoists the mirror onto his shoulder as they walked out with the last remnants of a life interrupted. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual energy, oblivious to the mysteries contained within the walls they left behind. They loaded the last of the items into the truck, the older man securing the mirror with a satisfied grin.
You know, mate, I think this mirror was the catch of the day. Strange thing is,
he continued, a hint of amusement in his voice.
when I look at it, I swear I've never looked better.
With a final nod, they close the truck doors and drive off, leaving behind a silent apartment and the unanswered questions that haunted its walls.